Death Battle's been a series that I've adored ever since I started watching it during season 1. Seeing this show from my childhood grow along with me for most of my life has been amazing to see unfold. They've done tons of episodes I consider among some of my favourite web content I've ever seen across their 180 plus outings over the last 13 years, with hopefully plenty more to come in the future. There's no shortage of fun matchups that have been covered, plenty of which I was actively hoping for beforehand, including my previous most wanted of all time. But surprisingly, despite how many times I've talked about Death Battle on this channel, I've never actually discussed the topic on my most wanted matchups in video form. Oh, what's that? You remember seeing another video from me on this topic before? No you don't. A bunch of my friends have made videos on this topic semi-recently, and it got me motivated to work on my own top 10. Those videos are really good, by the way, you should go check them out, I'll link them in the description. For my own top 10 though, I need to lay some ground rules so that this doesn't turn into a clusterfuck of flavour of the week hyperfixations that I have nothing to say about with a ton of double dipping into the same franchises over and over. That's completely hypothetically speaking, don't worry about it. So, to go over my self-imposed guidelines that I am more than prepared to play fast and loose with if I feel like it. 1. I can only have a single match per franchise, because I don't want things to get repetitive now, do I? 2. I have to know enough about the characters to where I could picture in my head how a fight would play out between them. And 3. Pretend I just put a really funny punchline here, because those are the only 2 rules that I'm going to try and follow. This means that there will be a few omissions that I'm going to throw on screen, but many of those have been covered by my friends in their own most wanted lists or through their own versus shows, so check those out. I still am covering a little bit of the same ground as some of them though, so to try and make up for that, I'll toss in an extra match to make this a nostalgic rating top 11, sure. I could just omit anything that they already brought up, but you'll see how high on the list that some of them got when we get to them. I should also say that I'm not the kind of guy who's especially concerned with the match being super thematic. Connections are nice to have, but so long as there's a decent core theme, I'm perfectly content with whatever gives the characters I like a chance to do cool stuff on the funny web show. More connections does not make your fight more interesting. If your pitch is longer than 2 sentences or 5 bullet points, or God forbid includes a single set of parentheses, then I ain't reading all that shit, but I'm happy for you, or sorry that happened. This list is almost exclusively made out of characters and series that I wholeheartedly love and want to see Death Battle cover either again or for the first time. My least favourite series included on the list is only because it is a huge franchise spanning many incarnations that I'm not familiar with most of. And my least favourite character on the list somehow ended up in the number 1 spot, huh? I'll go over the main things I want with each of these episodes, what animation style I think would suit it best, and who I think would win based on what I've heard. But I'm also not a power scaler and I haven't researched any of these characters, so don't expect anything that will get the versus forums cheering my name. Well, unless it's at my execution. Also, this list will likely differ from your own. You may think that one of these matches sucks or prefer one character to fight someone else, and just know that in those cases, your opinion is completely invalid and I'm always right about everything ever. I definitely take versus matchups incredibly seriously because they are serious and important topics that should never let anything like jokes and having fun get in the way of answering the most pressing questions in our modern society. As a matter of fact, I'll show you how seriously I'm taking this with the first match on the list, so let's start this off right now.
Bagel! Bagel!
My first draft of the list several months back was going to start with Hans vs. Freddy Fazbear, but now I replaced it so that joke from the intro doesn't work. Whoops. I hope the anticlimax is funnier. As for what's taking its place, well, there's this really underused series that rarely ever sees the light of day on Death Battle. You might have heard of it, it's called Marvel. And I only say that partly as a joke. The main comics have had more episodes on Death Battle than I've had coherent thoughts in my own head, but surprisingly they've never really tapped into alternate versions. All they've done so far in terms of changing which version is counted as the source material is for Archie Sonic, Dragon Ball Heroes, and DC Super Friends. Not like there's a lack of options either. The live-action Spider Royale might be the worst idea ever now since these characters are practically surrogate brothers, but MCU Spidey vs Movie Sonic still seems kinda fun. MCU Hulk vs Monster vs Godzilla sounds cool as a concept, which Nem has already done very well for his own show. Ultron Sigma vs Dark Khan would probably be the most fun thing to spawn from either of their games, which I hear is not a very high bar. There's the What If the Villains Won matchup that I get DM'd about literally every time I acknowledge it publicly, and that was in contention for this list if I didn't know even less about Eyes of Heaven than I did for normal JoJo's. But the one I chose for this uses my favourite Marvel media, and is matched against one of my other favourite pieces of media. The Spot from the Spider-Verse trilogy versus Jobu Tupaki from Everything Everywhere All at Once. Sometimes the most terrifying multiversal cosmic horrors all start with a little bit of experimental dimension hopping technology and a bagel. This segment's gonna be a little incomplete since Beyond the Spider-Verse isn't out yet, so we don't know the full extent 50% of what Spot can do. We've only seen brief flash forwards, so that's why it isn't any higher on the list. But this has the potential to be one of the most visually creative death battles of all time. I'd say Sprite suits this one best. Trunks vs Silver and Bill vs Discord show that they can handle the reality bending and breaking stuff, while I don't recall any precedent for that in 3D or hand-drawn. Spot before his Eldritch Awakening already brings a lot of creative potential with his holes, allowing him to teleport himself and others pretty much wherever he wants. And once Beyond comes out, I don't doubt that he'll open the door to some really cool high-scale shit as he tears apart everything around him. I hear he has similar stuff in the comics at some point, but I don't care, that's not the version of Spot that I know and care about. And considering Jobu only has one movie to work with, then I think it's fair game to not give Spot a full comic history to work with. I want to hear about the stuff the version of Spot I'm invested in can do, not which guys I've already heard about he can scale to. So while Spot will presumably be tearing the battlefield apart, Jobu will be taking them to different locations, possibly with different animation styles, but mainly with different environments. She can do pretty much whatever she wants, and I imagine she wouldn't be taking Spot too seriously to begin with, which we already know is not something he appreciates. This would likely work better if Spot started in his base state, then managed to activate an Alchemax Collider later into the fight and ascended into his godlike state for the climax. Who would take it once Spot does ascend? Well, again, Beyond the Spider-Verse isn't out yet, so I can't really say for sure since no one's seen the limit of what Spot can do. I will say that him keeping up with 4 spider people at once even in base form means he likely scales above Jobu physically, since physical feats in her movie don't get much higher than wall level and maybe a couple times the speed of sound as far as I can remember. But these are characters who are both seemingly capable of multiversal destruction that scale far above their physical bodies. I don't see any way in which Spot is getting past the everything bagel if Jobu is able to bring that out. But her control of it is also seemingly limited, and for all we know, Spot could be given an easier way around it when Part 3 comes around. His status as a multiverse hopper and ability to comprehend all the visions the Collider gave him also means Jobu might not be able to overload his mind and kill him with that. And that's if she could even catch him in the first place. So for now, Spot seems like the safe bet. Though Everything Everywhere All at Once isn't exactly a heavily researched movie in a versus sense, so I could be missing something. Either way, it would be cool to see it get covered. And this match sounds like it'd be fun. Not for the sprite artist though, considering Jobu changes outfits every 2 seconds. We might need to end up making some concessions there to not overwork the team.
Red sus, am I right?
Oh! Team Fortress 2 absolutely deserves a better death battle than the one it currently has. Tracer vs Scout was a victim of circumstance, so I understand why it was bad. I think it was for the best that it was bad. It's not Torian's fault that it was bad. That doesn't make it not bad. And it's sadly the game's only outing on the show. There are a few matches for these mercs that I'd be really happy to see, but my favourite's against another series that I think deserves better on Death Battle, Red vs Blue. That might be confusing for returning viewers who've heard me talk mostly positively about the 2 Red vs Blue Death Battles that we have, especially since Meta vs Carolina remains one of my top 10 favourite episodes of all time. But like, they've never fought against another series. Meta vs Carolina was a fun way to bring the show on in a way where the crossover aspect was with Death Battle itself, but then I would have hoped that their next one would be against a different series. Nope, bring in 10 more characters and have them fight each other in a team battle with a canonical winner. Wow, that's so creative and interesting. So I want TF2 to get a good episode, I want Red vs Blue to get one that isn't just infighting. That leaves Sarge vs Soldier as the obvious pick for this spot on the list. The red-clad lunatic war veterans who will eagerly dive headfirst into battle seem like a very natural fit for each other. The setup would probably make more sense if you used the blue soldier, but the red designs have always been more iconic for TF2, so I can't see them not using it. I don't really have any specific things I'd want in the choreography besides a shotgun fight and for Soldier to get to use some of his more wacky weapons, and also have him rocket jump around to keep up with Sarge driving the Puma. And of course, have it be funny. The comedic characters are the heart and soul of these 2 series, so I'd hope this time they can bounce off their opponents better than Tracer spouting every British stereotype and Tex ignoring Sarge outright. These 2 have such vibrant and manic personalities, do not let them go to waste. Also, working some machinima shots, I think that'd be cool. They had the right idea in Sarge's last death battle outing, but were limited to only one standoff shot where nothing happens. I think it'd be neat if this time they could be worked into the actual fighting somehow. And the death has got to involve ragdoll physics somehow, they make everything funnier. Who should be the one becoming the ragdoll? Honestly, I'm not too sure. The agreed upon stats for these series elude me. I don't really know if I entirely buy the 10 megaton explosion thing for Red vs Blue that they've mentioned before. If they stick with it, then I'm assuming Sarge should easily win, but if not, then I am completely lost. I definitely root for Soldier though. After how rough the last TF2 episode was, having them come back and score a win against one of Rooster Teeth's own properties would be the comeback story of the century. Either way, bring these funny goofballs on to shoot at each other. It sounds very fun, provided they don't revive the Boomstick dad jokes. You could even have Soldier fight like he does in the comics.
He's pulling his— Say hi to Chris! I'm Chris Pine! I'm the best, Chris!
Master Splinter from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles versus Master Shifu from Kung Fu Panda. So if anyone's heard me talk about Po vs Iron Fist before, I've mentioned how much I love the Kung Fu Panda movies, and Shifu is honestly my favourite character from them. Hell, he's a contender for my favourite character on this entire list, which is saying quite a lot considering the competition. He's not as prevalent in the sequels, but his growth in the first movie is amazing, with his apologies to Tai Lung being one of my favourite scenes. I'd love to see an analysis covering him, especially since, as far as I'm aware, he doesn't scale to the hero's chi stuff, so it wouldn't be a carbon copy of Poe's in regards to stats. He isn't the only reason I'd want this though. TMNT might not be a franchise I'm especially familiar with overall, but I've checked out plenty of the 2012 show and Splinter is by far my favourite character in it. I love how they usually keep him in reserve for fights, only bringing him out to show how serious things are getting. His story across the show of confronting his rival and regaining the daughter he had taken from him is some great stuff. And he's really funny on top of all that. So naturally I'd prefer if this version got the most focus in the analysis, though I'm not opposed to giving the spotlight to any of the other iterations at all. I'm sure they bring plenty to the table. I haven't seen the 2003 show, but I know that's like the fan favourite version of these characters, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was what they went with. I'd hope for a similar dynamic to Might Might and Yoda vs Mickey, with it being a friendly spark where the characters complement each other's abilities. Not quite the same super jolly and energetic gushing, but more giving sagely words of wisdom and complementing the skill and technique of the other. Maybe for the first half of the fight you could show neither of them taking a single hit to show their skills in avoiding and deflecting attacks, while giving the impression that they're both holding back somewhat since there'd be no reason for a kill by this point. Once it does come time for a kill though, I wouldn't want it to be super bloody or vicious or anything. Once the killing blow's landed, the loser can pass on peacefully like Oogway did as they commend their superior. Other than that, all I can think of that I really want to see is to have Shifu use the Golden Lotus Clap to blind Splinter at some point, but then he uses that to heighten his other senses and start doing even better. For the animation style, 3D seems like the most natural fit for this one, but they showed with Po vs Iron Fist that they can adapt Kung Fu Panda characters into sprites very well, so I can totally see them going down that route instead. As with most of these, I'm unsure on who would win. I know 2012 Turtles fought some alien that caused earthquakes, so that could be argued to city level, and I'm not sure if Shifu could match up to that without scaling to the Black Tortoise. They've mentioned that kind of power for the whooshy finger hold before, but that being said, I don't really agree with using that move for attacking potency since it's just a direct portal to the spirit worlds. If Shifu can land that though, then it seems like a surefire win. But they've brought up similar lightning timing feats for both series, so it's anyone's guess. I'll go with my gut and side with Splinter, but I also haven't seen the later seasons of Legends of Awesomeness or anything from Paws of Destiny and Dragon Knight, so maybe there's something in those that would change things up. Anything is possible when you have inner peace after all, and no matter who wins, as long as the episode is good, then I would be incredibly pleased.
This is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them.
Okay, I'm gonna try and stay very vague and brief on Wally and Eve versus Peabody and Atlas, since I helped write it for a Friends Versus show a while ago and it is not yet out as of the time I'm recording this. If it releases after this video, then I'll link it in the description, and if it gets cancelled, then I don't know, I'll ask if I can link the document with the script in the description, sure, why not. As for the match itself, I think Death Battle is overdue for another tag team match, and who better to bring in for that than the pairs of robots made to do the job that humanity couldn't do themselves. And it's not like other 2v2s where you need to research twice as many characters. Peabody and Atlas are identical in a versus sense, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Eve is the one with 90% of the material to discuss out of her pair. I think the dynamic between one duo being equally adept versus another where one member has to do most of the heavy lifting sounds pretty interesting. You could get very creative with the use of the portal guns, have Peabody and Atlas mainly fight with redirection and using physics to their advantage. None of them speak full sentences, so have GLaDOS observe and comment on what happens if you really want. This seems like it could be really out of the box and I'd be all here for it. I also just really love these characters and would be very excited to see them covered in Death Battle. Between Portal 2 and Wally, it speaks volumes to how much I love both of these that the latter is my lesser preferred between them, and I don't think either series has too much else that they could be brought in for. So here's hoping this one can happen. I don't expect it to, this is probably the least likely on the list to actually get made into an episode, but I've got enough copium to keep me going, so I'll be fine. Anyway, go watch the fictional Fisticuffs version if it's out. And if not, then go watch all the other episodes, it's a very good and underrated versus show. Okay, next segment now where I can go more in depth without spoiling anything that I worked on.
Satan magic!
Maui vs Hercules was one of my most wanted for quite some time, and I would still pop off for its announcement. But another match has recently come and taken its place. It still uses one of those movies, but instead gives the spotlight to my favourite character from it. Could you imagine? Nah, instead we have Hades from Hercules versus the Devil from Cuphead. What if we took demonic rulers and made them funny little scrimblo bimblos, who despite their incredible power and short tempers, rarely take action themselves and have their minions do all the heavy lifting for them. That's why I think sprites probably works best here, because you can more reasonably bring in a bunch of their henchmen like Pain and Panic, or, well, the henchmen. Having their first moves to be sending their underlings after the other would do good to show that aspect of their characters, as well as their overwhelming power when they inevitably burn through them really easily. I'd love to see Devil go up against Cerberus, or maybe even the Titans, which he could grow to kaiju size to have a scrap with. And on the flip side, you could have Devil send out his finest demons, assuming he doesn't accidentally burn them all himself. You could even have Stickler show up. Now that would be legit litness. Ultimately, it will have to come down to just the two of them though, in which case I would want them to throw in a comedic little slap fight before things start to heat up. And I mean that literally. If there's no scene where they both get incredibly angry and it cuts to really far away where you see an explosion from where they're fighting, then what are you even doing? The reason I chose Devil as my Cuphead rep over the Porcelain Protag himself is because he feels like the most well-established character for a death battle across both versions. He has plenty of powers and direct feats, with other bits of scaling to back him up, so he has plenty to go over for an analysis to aid the creative potential of the fight. It helps that I find him the funniest character in the Cuphead show. Everything he says cracks me up. You should watch the Cuphead show, by the way. It's actually quite good. Anyway, I think he'd bounce very well off of Hades. They'd both start out trying to be cool and collected, and then within 2 lines each they'd both be absolutely furious and out for blood. The banter between them would be comedy gold, which isn't something I think you'd get from Maui vs Hercules, who are both funny characters, but they pale in comparison to these two. Who do I think takes it then? Well, I was unsure about whether it would depend on the version of Devil you use, since his game doesn't have anything close to the show where Cuphead moves the sun and the moon. He might have failed in the end, but budging the sun at all is still incredibly impressive. More than enough to likely surpass any other character in any other match that I'm going to bring up on this list. But then Hercules ends with Zeus waving around an entire constellation, which seems like it would far and away surpass anything Devil has done or could scale to. So if Hades is at all comparable to that, then I'd say he has the stat advantage on lock. Hades also seems to have the better immortality on his side, and if he had any trouble killing Devil, then he always has the option to take away his immortality with the potion that he has. Devil does have a pretty wide list of abilities, but not only can Hades seemingly match him in veritable versatility, you're forgetting the teensy weensy but ever so crucial little tiny detail that Devil loses a lot of his powers if his pitchfork is taken from him. And with Hades' telekinesis, smoke arm things, and intangibility, I think that's entirely possible. So between his better stats and more reliable powers, it's looking to me that Devil's going to end up dead as a doornail. I could end the segment here, but I did mention my favourite Devil clip, so I might as well go ahead and show my favourite Hades clip.
What are those?
This movie was ahead of its time, let me tell ya.
Monkey.
A fairly popular match I've seen going around is the Plants vs Zombies versus the Monkeys from Bloons Tower Defense. I love both of these series and have a lot of nostalgia for them, but I don't know if it's feasible for a death battle. Something like that would require a pretty large-scale army fight with a lot of custom assets, and it seems like a massive undertaking. So why don't we start out with something a bit more manageable? I mean, Death Battle loves their superhero fights, so this wouldn't be too out of the usual wheelhouse. Super Brains from Plants vs Zombies versus Super Monkey from Bloons Tower Defense. They've done the What If Superman Was Bad match. Now how about What If Superman Was a Quirky Little Cartoon Scrimblow? This is the kind of match I would have lost my mind for back around the age when I first started watching Death Battle. I shouldn't say that like it's past tense, I would still pop off for it nowadays. I feel like this could work in any animation style. Death Battle's talented sprite artists can definitely translate these designs over in a way that would let them be super expressive. I can see Super Monkey working fine in 3D, which is what Super Brains is best known for, and both have a precedent for working in a hand-drawn art style. I guess my preference would be sprite, since I can see that allowing for faster-paced flying brick combat. They tend to have a better track record in that department. There isn't much I would hope for on Super Brain's end, other than him continuing to fight and not being bothered by getting 20 gargillion darts thrown into his chest. Use the powers from his alt costumes if you want, but I'm not too bothered about that. I'm pretty sure they're implied to be separate people, so no big loss if they aren't included. As long as they can work in most of his powers from Garden Warfare 2 and Battle for Neighborville, then I'm happy. Super Monkey I think would have a bit more going on, starting in his base form but building up through different upgrade paths as the fight progresses. Maybe they could destroy a bunch of balloons during their fight to build up the funds for him to do so. Have them Omni-Man their way through a swarm of Zeppelins, that sounds funny. Speaking of the different upgrade paths, I would love if the analysis had Wiz and Boomstick disagree on which one they prefer. Wiz would naturally go for the techie one with the plasma guns, Boomstick would side with the Batman ripoff, and after going over the advantages and disadvantages of both, they would go over the Sun God and Sun Temple, which would transition into Feet since I hear that's where the best stuff for him comes from. Also, if the Sun Temple got one of the best transformations in the animation, then it would be a free 10 out of 10. I don't know who should end up winning. I hear both get to country level with Super Brains causing this explosion and Super Monkey channeling the full concentrated power of the sun. So I think it'd be humorous if they took the fight to space and cratered the moon, or even took out an entire country that they were fighting in. You could rationalize that as destroying however many balloons, which would give the funny monkey all the money that he'd need to upgrade as many times as he'd want during the fight. Part of me is hoping Super Brains wins though. Not because I have more attachment to his series, but I like the idea of the kill being for him to rip out Super Monkey's brain, then as he's eating it, Super Monkey comes back as a zombie, and they fly off as friends sharing the brain as a snack. So even though I would love to see the army fight, I think the 1v1 with the dudes in the capes would make for a more focused fight that would interest me more, with less to juggle and less chance to result in them feeling like they could have done more with it. And if you like having two nickels, you're gonna love what's coming up next.
And when everyone's
Queen of England.
no one will be.
Groove vs Megamind is a match that has been on a lot of people's radars, especially after a lot of things in Season 9 seemed like they were hinting towards it, and it progressed up to the semi-finals in the Tournament of Champions. But you know what, I'm gonna dare to be different. Not putting either character against someone else, no. If I was allowing more than one per series, then this would have been another very strong contender for the list. But what's better than a Megamind episode against the movie franchise where I only sort of enjoy some of it? A Megamind episode where the other character is one of my favourite villains from one of my favourite movies of all time. Titan vs Syndrome is a comparison I've thought about a lot since Schaefer Ellis brought it up in his Megamind review, and it seems like it'd make for an entertaining crossover. The commentary on toxic entitled fanboys meets the commentary on toxic entitled incels. As cool as an army fight in Groove vs Megamind sounds, I think this seems like it'd be a lot more focused and easier to execute with how much simpler their arsenals are. Syndrome has jet boots, some explosives, the 0 point energy, and sure, give him the Omnidroid, why not? Titan, on the other hand, has heat vision, flight, and is powerful and can punch the best. They may have more I don't know about in the video games, but I can't imagine it's all that much. Titan does have another form that gives him Megamind's intelligence, but I personally wouldn't give him that since it seems like an entirely different power source to what made him into Titan that he wouldn't have on hand. You don't have to balance a huge arsenal of weaponry on top of witty back and forth banter like with Groove vs Megamind, which sounds like a much more difficult juggling act. The animation would be best off in 3D for obvious reasons, and I don't think this is the kind of fight where you need to worry all that much about intense hand-to-hand combat. Hal can flail around and look as goofy as you want him to, he's still relatively new to having powers and all that, and all Syndrome has to do is point and move one arm at a time, maybe occasionally walking around as he monologues, which Titan could cut him off in the middle of. Oh yeah, that's the main draw of this. These two are iconic for plenty of their lines, and I'd want to see Syndrome's cool and collected sinister monologue bounce off Hal getting increasingly more angry and frustrated, since he wouldn't be landing too many hits on Syndrome until the very end. Let Hal beat up the Omnidroid, but Buddy is just a guy and is portrayed as such. So if he's trading punches with someone who can do this, then something has gone horribly wrong. The kind of choreography I'd want here is a mix of Carnage vs Lucy, Stitch vs Rocket, and He-Man vs Lion-O. Syndrome would take very few, if any, direct attacks, throwing all his gadgets towards Titan, who'd be able to brute force his way through all of them. And the entire time Titan would be taking very minimal, if any, damage at all, only really being phased by the Omnidroid. If Syndrome ends up winning, he could use his intellect to set up a trap. Maybe freeze Titan with his 0 point energy and then put one of his explosives in his mouth. Or create an opening for the Omnidroid to land the killing blow. If Titan wins, well, we've seen how murder happy the guy is, I'm sure you can come up with something. You absolutely need to work in the no capes bit though. Syndrome could be making his getaway and then at the last second Hal grabs his cape and you can fill in the rest yourself. I can only assume Titan takes this one. Again, I'm not that familiar with the extended material for either series, but I've seen Hal toss things way larger than the Omnidroid, so I can see him getting past it. And then all Syndrome can do is toss him around, which he can only do for so long. Either way, I'd love to see this because it'd be great!
Sounds like some isekai bullshit, and don't
Wait,
care.
we've already...
And Bunchoi vs Luz Noceda, one of the most common matchups across my friend group's most wanted lists, with both Max and GA discussing it before me in their own videos. Despite not being number one, this is the match on the list I most hope they do sooner rather than later. It's basically a more modern Steven vs Star, with these being sister shows following similar plots to the point where there was even an official non-canon crossover cast recording at a convention. And if Steven vs Star has taught me anything, it's please God don't wait an extra 5 years until until the pairing is out of everyone's minds, because then the episode will not perform very well and that will reflect badly on our chances for more cartoon episodes in the future. It's already not a very well represented medium on the show. They've been getting better at it at recent times, especially with how season 10 wrapped up after I finished writing this, but I think it's telling that up until recently, a lot of discussions I had with friends trying to predict season lineups usually involved at least one instance of someone saying, I don't know about that one, we already have or are getting a cartoon episode this year. Anyway, these two are Disney's two isekai protagonists, being trapped in alternate worlds and needing to find their way home as they bond with their quirky surrogate family. Both shows also aired around the same time, and I even checked them out at around the same time, which is to say after one of them was already over and the other one was preparing to wrap up, but the important part is that I really liked them both. These are some of my favourite cartoons and I'd love to see them get covered in Death Battle. My only real hope for the analysis is that they wouldn't make any Super Saiyan 4 versus Super Saiyan Blue jokes. A similar one has been made in pretty much every single Sonic analysis. It has run its course. Besides that, just hearing Wiz and Boomstick discussing these stories and characters would be more than enough to make me happy. I think this animation makes the most sense to do in sprites. It worked well enough for Steven vs. Star. Hand-drawn could work too, but Origin's already made sprites of the characters before, and I think he mentioned an interest in updating them, so it'd be cool to see them get used. In the fight, I'd like to see a changing dynamic as things progress, with Anne starting on the defensive end against all of Luz's spells, dodging fireballs and slashing vines. Then later, as Luz is gaining the upper hand, she forces out the Calamity Anne form, who I'd hope would get a really cool transformation, with the music either getting more grandiose or outright switching to K-pop for a bit. Either would work. At this point, Anne would now be the one putting Luz on the back foot since she's so much physically superior, and Luz would have to switch up her game plan. She'd now be flying around with String Bean and getting more use out of the invisibility glyphs, with every attack she sends out being a distraction as she sets up one massive glyph around the arena which she'd activate to try and take Anne out. But I don't think it'd end up working since this does seem to me like Anne would be the one to take it. I haven't seen Luz do anything on par with some of the stuff I've seen from the Calamity Gems, even without Anne fully transforming. Well, that is unless you're bringing Titan Luz, in which case I'm a lot less sure. You've got scaling chains up to Collector moving the moon, but they're also explicitly weak to Titan magic, so I'm not sure how concrete any of that would be. That's if they even bring in the form though, which I don't know if I would personally, considering the hoops that had to be jumped through for her to get those powers. She had to die, talk with the Titan itself, and then was only given the remaining powers since Belos was possessing their corpse and he was going to purge the world. It's not something she retained after the fact either, but if they did want to give it to her for the sake of fairness, that's no big deal, I wouldn't mind. I don't think it changes the verdict either way, because you can much more easily argue Anne getting access to all three Calamity Gems since they're in the music box that she carries around for a lot of the show. And when she calls upon the power of all three of them, she was able to vaporize a moon, so I don't see this playing out any better for Luz. Anne would die afterwards, yeah, but if it counted as a win for Might Guy, I'm sure it would here. I'd be fine with either winning though. Amphibia is my preferred show between the two, but I actually like Luz a bit better as a protagonist. So no matter who wins, I do too, just on the basis of this episode happening in the first place. I mean, my Discord status for the last 2 years has been an Amphibia quote. That should tell you everything about how excited I'd be for this. The biggest hurdle I can see this episode facing is having a natural setup and a fight that allows the characters to keep their usual goofball personalities intact, but I'm sure whoever writes this one, if it happens, can figure something out. Just work in a... in there somewhere, and we're golden.
No. That would be your mother.
Your Forger versus... No, that wasn't censored as a bit. The title of this episode would genuinely be a spoiler, and I want to encourage you to go check out the Kill Bill films if you haven't seen them already. I only just watched them recently to get this match to qualify for the list, and holy shit, they're excellent. They're my first dip into Tarantino's filmography, and they have made a damn good first impression. Anyway, now that I've thrown that spoiler warning up and given you time to skip to the next segment, I'll just be saying Beatrix's name normally from here on out. Yor vs. Beatrix boils down to them simply being assassin wives who married for very similar yet very opposite reasons. One went through a legitimate marriage to get away from her assassin life, the other started a fake marriage with a fake family so she could keep her own assassination job going. Both are incredibly skilled in their fields and offer a lot you can do with hand-to-hand and blade fighting. I think it'd be cool to see Yor use her multiple knives as a way to try and get around the greater reach of Beatrix Hanzo swords. Eventually both could disarm each other and take it to hand, where you could demonstrate their great agility, parkour skills, and cartoonish strength. Yor does normally go further than Beatrix does, but Beatrix still has some good examples of it herself. I'd love to see them both get to utilise whatever they can find in the surrounding area to their favour. Maybe Beatrix could find a poison that Yor is able to shrug off, or throw something heavy that Yor is able to deflect. If she realises soon into the fight that Yor is much physically stronger than her, she could take to the defensive and try to land one of her insta-win moves, like plucking Yor's eye out or going for the 5-point palm exploding heart technique. Or there could be a one-stroke duel towards the end, where Yor's greater strength is put against the stronger metal that the Hanzo's horde is made of, making it more tense as to who's going to come out on top. I think I'd actually have Yor lose that one-stroke duel. Not because I think Yor loses the fight, because no she doesn't, but I think it would make for a sick ending to have Beatrix go for one last stab on a wounded Yor, only for her to grab the now weakened sword and shatter it in her hands. All this I think would work best in sprites. They have a better track record with fast-paced melee fighting, which is what I'd want most out of this. And while I'd want the lighting to be pretty regardless, I would especially love for them to do a silhouette shot like in the Kill Bill movies, and that seems more likely for a sprite fight to pull off well. I hit the end of what I had to say about this one sooner than expected, but that is about the gist of everything that I'd want. Cool assassin fight that would use a contender for my favourite character on this list, 2 new series that I love wholeheartedly, and the nature of this fight opens this one up for a particularly bloody killing blow. That's not something I've brought up too much beforehand since most of the others on this list don't particularly warrant it, but I think this one does. It's one of the ones on here I think is most likely due to Spy Family's ongoing popularity, so here's hoping that's enough to get them to want to do it as well.
Just these little stick people.
I've seen this idea of the internet stick figure battle royale being tossed around a lot, to the point where I'd even got a Brandon Yates custom commission track, and I feel like that's partially my fault. Or I guess the fault of the random commenter who brought it up and then I stole the idea for in the video that doesn't actually exist and you're just gaslighting yourself. And I'll be honest, I wouldn't really want to see that over a standard 1v1 anymore. Battle royales just aren't as feasible nowadays, and I wouldn't want the time spent on each character in the analysis and the fight to be lessened when it'd likely be the only time we'd ever see any of them. So that begs the question, which 2 am I going with? Well, X Fancy Pants. I'm sorry, I loved playing his games when I was in primary school, but he brings nothing to the table here. He's the Volnut of the group. Animator vs. Animation is contending with Death Battle for my favourite web show in general, so that's a lock, I'm going for that. It would get the biggest pop-off from me if it was revealed for a Death Battle out of any series on this list. And I loved the Henry Stickmin games from when I played with them in high school, so Second Coming vs. Henry seems like the easy choice for me. But I wanted to avoid double dipping on what Larry already talked about, so I'd totally be willing to shelf that and put Chosen One vs. Red from Dick Figures in this spot instead. But for that to have been eligible with my rules, I actually needed to have seen Dick Figures, which I hadn't. So I watched it, and no, I'm sorry, this show is not for me at all. I'm sure I'd like it if I grew up on it. There are web shows that I like now that I know this is the case for and that I wouldn't be a fan of without nostalgia playing a big role. But having only seen Dick Figures now, I wouldn't be excited to see Death Battle cover it. My hype there would solely be for Animator vs. Animation. It would still be novel for them to cover it at all, and I still would be happy to see this one happen. But I'm sorry, Larry, I'm stealing your idea and going back to the initial plan of Orange vs. Henry. Compared to Red vs. Chosen One, which would be a lot simpler with its flying brick melee combat and elemental blasts here and there, Orange vs. Henry I feel should be more focused on their creativity and resourcefulness, since that is the big theme of the match besides them just being internet stick figures. Second Coming is his Minecraft arsenal, but I wouldn't want the fight to entirely revolve around that from the get-go. I would want to see him adapt to all the wacky bullshit gadgets that Henry'd be pulling out from thin air, then kicking his ass whenever he's able to get in close thanks to his far greater skill. But Henry would be able to keep putting distance between them and catching him off guards. Maybe you could have the item selection come up, Second Coming can see it, and then he can steal another item from there. Possibly Henry's first choice, so he'd have to make do with something else. Then you gotta bring out the teleporter for more game hopping, allowing Orange to show off more of his own skill set by weaponizing anything he can pick up before the final set piece ends up on the desktop. I'd say that's when you can have him snag the master block and bring in the Minecraft stuff. But then have Henry bring out his own best gear and gain the upper hand, and then the climax has Second Coming going into his awakened state and combining that with the master block to give a really cool and intense ending as Henry keeps bringing out more unpredictable gadgets to fight him off. I'm struggling to think of what else I can add that Larry hasn't already summed up in his own video. Again, go watch that one if you haven't. Red vs. Chosen One would be cool too, but the choice was between a game series that I hold a lot of nostalgia for, or a web series that I didn't like very much at all. I'm pretty sure AVA likely loses both matchups anyway, since I've seen the other sticks go way higher in scale, so the choice was obvious for me. Might be a little anticlimactic with how high up on the list this is, but thankfully there's one left that I have a bit more to say about.
Finally, a worthy opponent. Our battle will be legendary.
Those who may have seen that old non-existent video that I mentioned before might recall that my number 1 most wanted was Boros vs. Deoxys. Look, I'm not a believer of the whole more connections is more better mentality, but come on man, they're just regenerating aliens and that's it. I guess I was just that desperate for a Boros match since he didn't have any other options that I liked back then. One Punch Man is my all-time favourite series, and Boros is one of the few characters in it I'd still want to see Death Battle tackle. Tossing in a Gen 3 Pokemon was just icing on the cake. Then I checked out a little show you might have heard of called where I got introduced to a character by the name of Battle Beast. He wasn't in the show very much, but then I watched a summary of his story arc in the comics, and now I have a Boros match that I like. Take some of the most widely beloved and iconic modern superhero IPs for a battle of East versus West, putting their battle-hungry alien warriors against each other in an attempt to satiate both of their desires for the best fight of their life. Fans of these shows may not think that either character has enough to work with, but that's not the case at all. Boros does have a collective 20 minutes of footage to use, that is true. But Boros is the rare case of a character who basically spends every single shot that he's on screen giving material for a death battle analysis. He's always either commanding his army for his assault on City A, fighting Saitama, demonstrating one of his powers, performing direct feats, stating how strong he is, explaining his backstory, or dying. And the main One Punch Man story has been done across 3 different mediums. Soon to be 4 with a live-action movie that's releasing from the production team behind Venom in the Fast and the Furious movies. And there is other stuff like the games to work with, so you have enough ways to prevent the analysis from getting too visually repetitive. Battle Beast on the other hand is only in 1 episode of Invincible where he isn't even the main focus, and 1 shot in the season 1 finale. So he doesn't have much animated material to work with, but he has more than enough comics, which I will be spoiling just in case you missed the warning in the intro. He has plenty of appearances in the comics with a ton of fights to use, including against the main antagonist of one portion of the story, who had suffered an injury and he could have easily killed. But because Battle Beast wanted a good fight, he cut open his own stomach just to level the playing field, and then fought against Thrag in that condition for several days straight. He did just barely lose that battle and died in the process, but that is still one of the biggest power moves I have ever seen. He was even such a tough opponent that Thrag wore his pelt as a trophy, so he has plenty of cool shit to bring up in this analysis as well as a conclusive end to his story. In terms of how I'd want the fight to go down, the setup writes itself. Boros conquers worlds looking for worthy opponents, and Battle Beast fights alien tyrants and frees their worlds as a byproduct of him wanting a worthy opponent. Just have him show up during one of Boros' invasions, maybe having already killed his crew, and take it from there. I'd want this animation to be done as sprites. These designs and effects seem like they'd be way too much for a substantial hand-drawn fight, and I see the gore being way more feasible for sprites in 3D. And yeah, there'd need to be gore in this, I mean it's an Invincible fight. For the actual fight dynamic, the combat wouldn't need to be anything too complex because these are mostly just brawlers with a few weapons and laser blasts. Battle Beast could push through more severe injuries which Boros has to regenerate from to show their differences in that field. Though you could have Boros wait a while to regenerate an arm and prove that he can fight with only one, just like he's done before. Boros could fight from a distance with lasers that Battle Beast powers through. Maybe you could even have Boros kick Battle Beast to the moon and they could fight in space. Or just generally let them destroy a lot. Boros is going to be causing a lot of collateral damage with how he normally fights. At some point I'd love them to do some kind of variation of the Madara vs Aizen split screen with both being fully engrossed in their fight. Which brings me into the main appeal for me here, seeing the difference in their mindsets. Both want a worthy opponent, but not in the exact same way. Boros wants the thrill of a good fight, the ultimate obstacle for him to overcome. He showed that he was having fun with Saitama making him finally exert himself, but he was also getting annoyed at the guy for pushing through everything he sent his way. So I could see him getting frustrated with Battle Beast holding the edge for a lot of the fight, which I'd imagine he would, he kinda has to in order to warrant Boros going into his higher forms. So while Thok shouldn't be turning this into a Shadow vs Mewtwo tier one-sided smackdown, Boros should only be getting the advantage temporarily with each transformation before the tides start to turn back around on him. Battle Beast on the other hand doesn't just want to meet an equal, he wants to meet his superior. He wants to be given a death befitting a warrior on his level, which is why he was thankful when Thrag did just that. So I can see him being equally frustrated when he sees how quickly Boros is burning through his own stamina, or just how many times he would have killed him already if not for that pesky regeneration. This has to culminate in an ending where Battle Beast pushes through the collapsing star roaring cannon for one final attack, maybe with the planet exploding on top of them both as he lands it. From then you can have the loser thank the winner for the fight of their lives as they float amongst the rubble, with the winner either being fulfilled or disappointed depending on who takes it. Who should take it? Honestly, I got no idea. Boros can blow up a planet with his trump card move and should scale to stuff like Psychos lifting a chunk of the earth, but I got no clue where Battle Beast stands in all this. Invincible planet level and above stuff all seems pretty contentious as far as I can see, but you can definitely argue this being close and debatable, which makes me like it even more. You've got the potential to bring in 2 series that I love, 2 characters I think are really cool, and have them square off in what could be one of the most intense, destructive, exciting fights they've ever done, with a debate that really could go either either way given how much they shied away from the comics in Omni-Man vs. Homelander, so there's not much of a precedent to where they scale Battle Beast. It's for all these reasons that I can safely call Boros vs. Battle Beast my current most wanted episode of Death Battle. So there you go, 11 matches that I think would be really fun to see. Do I expect any of these to actually happen? The more niche ones, probably not, but I have a few highly popular mainstream choices on here that I can picture being done at some point. So here's hoping. But that'll do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. I really wanted to get this video right this time, so I hope I've managed that. Let me know in the comments what you think of these ideas. Maybe even rank them in your own order of preference because ranking lists give me serotonin. And let me know what your most wanted is as well, sure. Just don't write your college thesis explaining the connections. And that's all I got. See you later.